Hello everybody, this is Fun Police and I am back with another cards video. For today, we're going to be taking a look at the February balance changes that are going to be coming on the 10th of this month. Just a few days away from the time of recording, but as the title implied, my opinion on these are not as high as they usually are. I think some of these are either kind of weak changes, or some of them I think are actually just bad changes and shouldn't be implemented. And I'll talk about them when I get there. I do think there are some good changes, though. I think some of the reworks to a couple units are really cool, but I think it's brought down a lot by some really questionable changes, in my opinion. To start out, very simply, the 99th Infantry Battalion. This is being reworked almost entirely, becoming a 2-credit 2/2 infantry, and it has deployment. If you control the front line, give a friendly unit +2/+2. The previous version used to bounce an enemy unit, and now it's instead going to be buffing yours. And if we just look, the main aim of this is obviously to nerf the US mid-range or front line deck that has been a top meta deck for a little while now. And it definitely does have some benefit. 99th Infantry Battalion was able to bounce a lot of guards out of the game and made using guards to block block the progress of a front line just not that relevant. However, with 99th Infantry gone, some options open up. Right now, that means that the current US frontline decks are only going to have the M16 half-track to bounce enemy guards, and only infantry guards. So this is actually potentially a massive win for large-end guards, namely those of the tank, like the Churchill Mark IV, the KV1 1939, and a couple others. They could maybe start seeing more play, being a much harder wall to move and just overall requiring more effort to get out of the way. And I do think that is a good change. However, the new effect of giving an infantry unit, giving any unit +2/+2 if you control the front line, seems really bad. Not bad as in like weak, but instead as too powerful. I have a lot of worry that this is going to turn US frontline into a very snowball and high rolly based deck, because if you, for example, have a Red Devils in the front line and you make that into a 3/5 and you're facing like any other aggro deck, the game's over for them. Like, you've just won. Like, there's nothing they can do. I guess they could somehow Flame Panzer it, but if they're not running Flame Panzer, I don't see how they're going to in any way deal with like a 3/5 Red Devils. And even just putting it on something like the Panzer 35T, that's a 4/4 that's attacking for free every turn. You know, or even just something, and even stuff like just the 1st Marines, or maybe like an M4 Sherman. You're making these into like 5/6s and 6/6s, and that's a lot of stats. That's going to be able to trade into guards and just deal tons of damage. This is especially a problem because in this patch, the Jabrig's Pioneer 95 is not getting nerfed either, and that means that if you go Jabrig's Pioneer on turn 1, turn 2, you could potentially play Red Devils, and then, you could move the Jabrig's Pioneer into the front line and then buff it with 99th Infantry. So potentially on turn 2, you could have a 3/3 in the front line alongside a 2/2 on your support line. And that is just talking about like one example. You could also just spend that second turn with that the Jabrig's Pioneer triggered and push like a 1st Marines out, or like push a Whirlwind into the front line and then buff it with 99th. And regardless of whatever play pattern is talked about, I think there is a potential massive problem that 99th is going to be a card that is similar to Jabrig's Pioneer, where if you get it early and can activate it, and it sticks around and it does its thing, it's going to snowball the game for you. And I don't like that. I don't like that 99th is now a card that kind of feeds into a snowball, kind of win more effort. So instead, let's just move on from that. Next up, we have the Argyllshire, Highlanders. Again, butchering that name probably. Very likely I am. But regardless, it's getting a new effect. It now gets +1/+1 when you deploy or add a guard unit. And that is quite an interesting change. The British guard deck has had various things added to it over the past couple patches, and I think it's a very interesting deck. We've seen stuff like buffs to the Churchill Mark IV, being a 2/7, getting that 1 extra defense. And it's slowly been kind of moving, and it got stuff like London Brigade. And I now think that the Highlanders are now going to better fit into that deck. Being able to make this into like a 2/7 or a 3/8, it gets very big very fast with just a couple guards deployed. And I think it's much more effective than the current effect, which is really, really weak. Also, now works very well with naval support if you want to go that manner. Because it's going to always have 5 health above it, you could potentially make this into a very big unit. If you play naval support on the base version, you make a 6/6 infantry, and then every time you add a guard after that, it becomes like a 7/7 and an 8/8 and 9/9, and it could be a very big beatdown card. You could even add it on the attack from 1st London Brigade, and there's just potentially there's another tool to fit within this deck, and I think that's a very interesting change. There is also the idea of including it with legions. Because legions have stuff like Planswitch, which adds 2 guards to your support line, that could double activate the new Highlanders, and you could potentially make that into a big threat for a legion deck, which is an interesting idea. Overall, I do like that change quite a lot. I think it's a very interesting one and works well with a couple different decks that have been kind of slowly growing in power over time. Moving on, we have Long Range Recon. Long Range Recon is being reworked. It now has Intel 1, and your HQ gains defense equal to the number of all cards on the battlefield. What are cards on the battlefield? Well, that includes all units and both HQs. So, Long Range Recon is essentially giving you 2 health plus all the units on the board, alongside an Intel. So this is a very big nerf, and I think completely ends up removing this card from Resistance. I am not the most well-versed in Resistance, but I do not expect this to have any sort of play within Resistance going forward, which is a big hit. I did agree that Long Range Recon could have used a nerf, but I think this is an overly harsh nerf. On top of that, I just don't think the new Long Range Recon is going to end up being worthwhile. It just seems too expensive for that effect. If it was maybe 3 credits, I think it could be justifiable. Obviously, it fits into maybe some sort of Japan Legion deck. They like to flood the board quite a lot and will appreciate the Intel proc. But any other deck than that, I think there's just not enough units on the board usually to make it work in general, especially for 4 credits. So this is a change I really don't like. I would like it more if it was 3 credits at least, but it's just something that I think the Long Range Recon is dead now. I don't think it's going to work in anything except maybe in Intel, specifically because of it potentially working with everything that Legions wants to do. Then we have the L640. This is a change I really don't like. The L640 is a deck that sits as a fun meme deck, trying to kind of go all in on buffing 1 unit and winning, and kind of losing if that doesn't happen. The L640 is essentially got nerfed because it was potentially too scary with the 99th Infantry Battalion and their change. And I think that's a stupid idea. I don't see why this was nerfed in any way. And to be honest, I don't think 99th would have made the L640 broken in any manner, because I think US Frontline would have just done this better. I guess there is a little upside in that it's a little easier to kill off the L6 now. So if you're looking to bounce deployment effects, could be something, but that seems such a meme that L640 is getting nerfed for, I think, a dumb reason. I don't like this change at all. The Ki-51 Sonya is the next one. It is going from 2 credits to 1 credit and now becomes a 1 credit Japanese bomber. And that is actually quite impactful. Up until this point, Japan Air has kind of not had an actual 1-drop to play, and now it does, which gives Sonya a new breath of life. Also, there is more benefit to its deployment text now, or its actual effect now, being so cheap. The Ki-51 Sonya could now actually be played out early, and then you pin enemy units and are able to instantly kill them with the Sonya. There's a couple different ways, like naval operations or the surprise attacks from that 1 credit Japanese tank, which we can see as the, I believe it's the Type 94. Yes, the Type 94 TK. And that adds surprise attack, which is a very cheap way to pin. So there is some synergy with that. Also, some synergy with air units, although that mostly is going to come from being a very cheap way to activate air superiority, and also potentially working well with Rule the Skies, as you're able to cheaply buff it up. I don't think Japan Air is going to become a meta deck. It just still needs a lot of work to go into it, but I think that overall, the Sonya is a good step in that way. And if we see some new Japan Air cards aimed at the deck, I think it could maybe work. We move on to Scouting Party, which is being completely reworked again. It's going from 4 credit from its current version, which has just never really worked, to a 3 credit order. It has Intel 1 on it, and it adds 2 33rd Recon to your support line. For reference, the 33rd Recon is the 1 credit 1-2 that when it takes damage draws you a card. I really like this change, to be honest. There is, I think, a lot of potential with a card like Scouting Party now. Potentially, it offers a lot of card draw. It at least draws 2 cards, but it's also giving you 2 units to work with, and there's potential to potentially ping the 33rd Recon and get extra draw, and it even has that intel to fit into a Japanese Legion deck. And maybe that's where it's going to fit up. I've done some deck techs on Legions before, and I think Legions is pretty powerful on its own and is largely held back by the fact that there's not a lot of intel cards in the main nations, which makes it difficult to run enough Legion summoning stuff that you'd want to run in Poland alongside the intel. That's fixed a little bit with something like Scouting Party, and it also provides card draw inherently. I honestly really do like what is being done with Scouting Party. I think that's a very cool card. Probably my favorite change of the set. Next up is No Surrender. It's going from 4 credits to 5 credits, but it also is now giving those light infantry it summons Blitz. So I think one of the biggest effects that people were talking about was its combination with Ura and other similar buffs. Where is it? There it is. Ura, which is giving all of your infantry. So, although this is quite expensive, late game, if the enemy has a unit in the front line, you could potentially play this out, buff all your units up, swing in with Ura because you have those blitz units, and potentially deal, 10, 20 damage to the enemy HQ if you're able to buff these infantry units up high enough. I think that's maybe a bit hopeful. The big reason being is that just so expensive. I think the bigger effect is that you're going to see a lot of tokens making it to the front line now. Being able to instantly shove 4 light infantry into the front line seems really powerful. It makes room and makes the support line issue that tokens often have much less of an issue. It is a little more expensive, but I think it's honestly a lot better now. Maybe we see tokens actually reach meta status once again. It got that 503rd motors buff last time around, and that was a pretty good buff. No Surrender might fit into a similar manner. We have dive bombing being buffed for a second time now. Instead of giving the unit -3 attack and -1 defense, it now outright does 1 damage to the enemy, and it sets their attack to 0 until your next turn. So it essentially got 2 buffs. First off, it is now an outright ping. It isn't a temporary ping like the old -1 defense, and it sets the attack to 0, which means that even the biggest, baddest, scariest unit now will fall to that. I think the biggest thing that ends up happening with that is that you potentially see some use of the JU-87B2, which adds the dive bombing to your hand. This potentially becomes a little bit more appealing now because dive bombing is a lot better. I don't know if you're going to run dive bombing itself, but maybe the JU-87 is a more capable vehicle now, or a more capable unit now, and maybe there are some decks that would be willing to do this, because dive bombing, being able to like blank attacks for a turn, could be quite powerful at letting you attack into guards or just kill off an enemy unit without having to trade into it. It's a very interesting change. I don't know if it's going to have a lot of meta impact right now, but it is, I think, a big buff to the card overall. HMS got a little tiny nerf. The 2 swordfish that are summoned from it now don't have blitz if they're ever bounced. It's a very small nerf to Brit Air. It's very, very small change and might matter in some circumstances, but overall it's not, I think, a big change. The bigger change is to Calm Before the Storm. Going from 3 credits to 4 credits, Calm Before the Storm has been a very powerful card, especially in Brit Air, where it's able to buff up all those cheap air units to very, very big, scary threats. At 4 credits, it's a little bit slower, a little bit harder to use, gives the enemy a bit more time to deal with it. I think this is a decent nerf to Brit Air and is going to drag the deck down a little bit, because it's important to remember Brit Air was not super meta. It was strong, but it was not meta until Calm Before the Storm came out. And then after Calm, it became very powerful. So that being slowed down a turn, I think is going to have a relatively high impact on Brit Air. I think Brit Air will probably survive it overall, but it's not going to... but maybe we see other decks be able to fight back against it a little bit more. And that's it for the changes. Only 10 changes this time around. And as I said, I was a bit critical of some of them. I especially don't like the changes to something like 99th and long range and L6 40. I do like some of the changes, but yeah, overall, I am not as happy with this patch. I wish at the very least we had seen some more buffs. Maybe to just 2 or 3 more cards. It's a small patch, and I just think some of these changes are going to actually not be good for the meta, and I just worry. I don't like being a downer in videos like this. I always try to look at the upside, and I do think there is some interesting things. I actually have a full deck tech I plan on making, potentially concerning Scouting Party. I think that's one of the best changes to the card. But at the same time, there are just changes here that I just don't like, and I think just overall aren't good. And maybe hopefully I'm proven wrong. I'm totally fine being wrong, but I don't know. I just have a bad feeling about this patch. Voice is a little dry there, sorry, but I've been talking for a little bit. But otherwise, sadly, on that sour note, that's where I'm going to end things for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I have some other deck techs that I plan on making up, so be on the lookout for that. Make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment on giving me your thoughts on these balance changes. Do you agree with me? Are there changes, or maybe there's things I'm not considering? Which of these changes are your favorite? I'm always interested in hearing what changes people like the most. But otherwise, that's going to be it. Thank you for watching and have a good day.